And good evening, everyone, or good morning, or good afternoon, or whatever place you're in today or listening to it. Welcome to another virtual DDD session. With me from the organizers, Christina again. And we'd like to welcome you. And today with us is Alice, Marc, Trond, and Andrew. And we're going to talk a bit about fostering autonomous teams. And we're going to discuss soon what autonomy means here. But first, let's do a quick introduction round. Alice, do you want to start?
Thanks, Kenny. So as said, my name is Ellis de Haan. I've been working for Xebia for 2 years as business unit manager of our Xebia IT Architects unit. And before this, I've been working in IT for IT at ABN AMRO, one of the biggest banks in the Netherlands, where I met Xebia and where I said, I will never work for them. And well, here I am. I graduated from an executive MBA of the University of Nijrode on the research, helpful behaviors of middle managers in an agile transformation. And I think that's why I'm here.
Thanks. Marc, you're up next.
My name is Marc Burgauer. I live in Scotland, but if you wonder by my accent, I am Swiss originally. I work as an agile coach, currently at Register of Scotland. And you might have caught some of the work I'm doing with Chris McDermott and others on maturity mapping.
Great, thanks. Trond.
Yeah, Trond here from Oslo. I'm not really working on agile or digital transformations or agile transformations or anything really. I get a keen interest of it, and I do at my current client actually do try to help them to move in that direction, but not in that role specifically. But yeah, I'm working as a consultant for a Norwegian consultancy called Sienta, and I'm mainly working in architecture with architecture these days.
Thanks. And last but not least, Andrew.
Yeah, hello. So I'm feeling a bit underqualified, but I'm a tech principal at ThoughtWorks, based in the UK. So I'm originally from Scotland, but sadly not in Scotland at the moment. But I'm pretending to be up in Scotland. But I do so like I kind of work. Oh, this is good, right? Yeah, exactly. But like Trond, I do consulting. But at the moment, and I think one of the reasons why I'm here is because I am doing lots of transformations, agile transformations, and kind of working with lots of our clients to try and figure out how they can get the most out of the skills and the enthusiasm and the people they have in their organizations, because they've realized that how they previously structured things, not just in their software delivery, but in, because of DevOps, other aspects of their organization, how they're getting in the way of the people who want to deliver value. And so therefore we speak to them a lot about how they can get out of the way. And so I've written various Twitter threads about anarchy and how it can kind of inspire some of these things. And I'm really interested in all of those kind of things, and trust organizations and all the other standard stuff that people talk about. So I'm really interested to have this conversation.
Cool, thanks. So before we dive into that whole anarchy, the topic here is fostering autonomous teams, but we already got into discussion, right? And there's been a discussion before. The word autonomous is really not a good word to use for a team. And I think, Marc, you had a nice answer before in this talk. Could you elaborate a bit more about autonomy and agency in this way before we start the whole conversation?
Okay, so autonomous teams, that's always a contentious issue, especially if you work in large organizations, because there's the issue of coordination amongst the teams. So then my immediate question when teams say we want to be more autonomous is, so you want autonomy to do what and when and where and with whom? And so that already starts pointing things a boundary. So what are the boundaries? So we picked this, I think most of us, up from Jay Bloom, who did a good talk about whole work, where he actually says what we should really pay attention to is agency. And agency is basically what impact do you have at the outcomes of your organization or within your team? And so if you follow agency, then autonomy becomes contextual and it becomes bounded. And it's more something that you approach obliquely, as in you do certain things and then you look, do we have the right level of autonomy or do we miss the right level of autonomy? So also in this context, then autonomy is a question of who makes decisions for what, and who has the competence or responsibility or accountability for what. And there are things that we want to keep local in a team, and then we should have autonomy. So we talk about self-organizing teams in Agile. We don't want to come in, we don't want managers to come in and tell who has to do what piece of work in order for us to deliver as a team the outcomes the organization needs from us. But equally, we can't have all the expertise usually, so in a complex organization within a team that we need to deliver. So we constantly have to negotiate these boundaries. And so looking at agency is a much more useful point of action. And then later we can see, has that given us the autonomy that we need or not? And if we're not having the autonomy, then there should be decisions that we can contend and can challenge.
Good. Thanks.
But why we cannot have not all the capabilities, but at least the intention and ask questions and be able to do decisions to deliver? You said a team cannot have all the competencies.
So that depends, of course, on the complexity of what we're trying to deliver as a team.
Yeah.
But so I'm not dogmatic about this, but so Agile would argue that a team is most effective around size of 7. If you work in a complex socio-technical environment where you have to negotiate a complex technical environment, but also regulatory interaction maybe with lots of people inside and outside of your organization, you simply can't have all the knowledge and the expertise and the practices that you need to deliver with 7 people. And you don't need all that expertise and knowledge, etc., all the time. So you need to know when to negotiate and when to collaborate with people outside of your team.
Yes, exactly. This is what I call autonomous team, to know who to ask and when and why or why not.
Yeah, so it's a bit of wording. So how does this all relate to, Andrew, you were just mentioning that your anarchy threat?
Yeah, so I think, so I've done some experiments with this. So because I, like I said, we get clients and we go into clients and they have lots of we typically see lots of skilled people who are, things are getting in their way, whatever those are. So there might be bureaucracy, there might just be, an architecture which doesn't let them do things, division of responsibility which doesn't do the things that they need to be able to do to deliver value, or lots of other things. And so I was kind of wondering about how we can change things. So I think DDD helps you kind of align architecture to things, not everything, but large aspects of it. And other things kind of help you as well. One of the things I've been experimenting most with is, and hence the anarchy thing, bureaucracy, which typically kind of gets put in place to stop the downsides of things that Marc is talking about. If it kind of persists, I frequently see it becoming a thing that's self-perpetuating and self-reinforcing, and then so it stops doing the function it was supposed to do, and then it just starts getting in the way. So what we've been experimenting with, and there's a lot of parallels around about political anarchistic thought, which is you only have governance where it's needed, and it's short-lived, and it's small, and it goes away. How much we could kind of bring in those ways of thinking into how to run teams and how to make decisions, and how to make decisions within teams, but also across teams. And that's the kind of stuff we've been experimenting with, and it's kind of interesting. It's you've got to trust people, but it's interesting. You can't get away with nothing, but what structures you put in place, and then how much you can evolve and experiment with removing things, and how much you can kind of build a culture as opposed to a bureaucracy or a structure of collaboration and sharing and stuff is something that's quite interesting to me that we've been experimenting with. So.
Yeah. So Alice, you've worked at a big bank and now at a not that big company, ZVL, right? So how do you relate to this? Because in the Twitter discussion, right, it went a bit from, well, we need good leadership. Do we need management? So what are your thoughts?
Well, my first thought is, what I often see is that we don't take into account the maturity of teams. We're often saying that we need to go to an organization with agile teams, and then we want autonomy. And I heard Marc saying, hey, you want autonomy as a team. Not every team wants autonomy. Not every organization wants autonomy. And if you look into self-determination theory, when people are optimally motivated to perform, you have a certain way of autonomy, you have a certain maturity in competence, and you have a certain maturity in relatedness. So are you connected to others, to your team, to your organization? What in my research came forward is that there is a sequence in these competencies. So a person first wants to understand and to have a certain competence. Am I understanding? Do I understand what I need to do, and am I good at it? And that's a perception. It's not for somebody else to say that somebody is good at it. Does the team itself feels that it's good in doing what it needs to do? And then secondly, do I trust my team to deliver together instead of only being responsible for my own deliverable, what was pre-agile? And then thirdly, we want to have a certain autonomy. And what you often see is that there is an assumption that team wants autonomy, that people want autonomy. Well, they don't have the competence yet on what is actually being expected from them. And if you then ask and give people autonomy, it will feel for them like they're drowning. And then you get a certain anxiety, people not responding anymore. And then you get this interesting tension between managers saying, hey, this team, you wanted autonomy, but you're not getting it, you're not doing it. So I need to do it myself. You get this step-in behavior. And then the team says, hey, we want to do it, but now the manager is doing it. And then is when you go into stratified system theory, where management is doing the work of the team, and the team is just like, why should we do this anyway? It's a very difficult tension, but you should not assume the team wants autonomy. There is a maturity in this.
Isn't that what's well, if I look at transformations, we usually see, and the same goes for Scrum or Agile, usually from the upper layers going down, right, where it drips down. For me, it seems also a bit of clashing. Someone wants you to become more autonomous. It's like, okay, but it seems a bit friction over there. A top-down approach to, but the management doesn't change themselves. That's what I usually see.
So what I thought was very interesting is when, so self-steering or self-organizing teams, that's not new. It's already been here for ages. And there was research of Moravec in 1999, who said, if you introduce self-steering teams, two things happen. There will be resistance and misunderstanding for both employees and managers. For employees, because I first was only responsible for my own deliverables, and suddenly I'm responsible for a team deliverable. A misunderstanding on that people often say, this is my right, and forget about their duties. But the same counts for management. There is also a misunderstanding. Hey, but what do I need to do? And resistance, because there can be a feeling of job loss, job status, job security, anything. And we should very much take this into account, because this is why people act the way they do. There is this misunderstanding and resistance that we need to deal with. So yeah, if you don't get into this cycle and you understand why people do the things they do, we will never get into this solving of autonomy for teams or managers.
So I see people agreeing there.
So this, I've got a very quick point. It's very interesting because I haven't read much about anarchist literature, but the little bit I've read, there is a get out clause where the anarchists say they never really addressed there's an element of self-selection. So, people who set up kind of anarchist structures, or people who think they're anarchists, are obviously self-selecting. It's not everyone. So it's very interesting that you talk about that, Ellis. It's also very interesting that the other get out clause is eventually we keep experimenting, and then eventually we find something that works, but they don't talk about how long they've kept experimenting and how many times they've failed. And in a company, maybe in a political organization, that doesn't have such an impact, but in a commercial enterprise, there's a limit to how many times you can let people self-organize and fail or leave the company and all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of that was super interesting, because that's one of the things that really challenges me is if it isn't for everyone, or how do you make it for as many people as possible, and how do you kind of grow them and build a safe environment for people to become increasingly not autonomous, but whatever the other word was. That's the thing, because you can't just remove everything all of a sudden and assume it's going to work, because it doesn't just work, right? So that's very interesting to me.
So I think this is where I hope managers come in place, because to give people that feeling of competence, because it's a perception that's very important from the person who is the actor. So to give that feeling of competence, to help that person grow into its role, understand what he or she needs to do, and then also create that trust in that team. That is important before we talk about autonomy. And indeed, Mark, I very much agree with you that, and what does autonomy mean? And let's define autonomy, and until where, and what do you want to control or anything? Because making very good decisions on that is super important for a team to create confidence. And I think that is one of the important roles of a leader or a manager, to have that what is competence. And I think what was a very interesting outcome from my research was when we introduced Agile within ABN AMRO, there was a person who went into the role of Scrum Master. And there was this leader, this manager, who heard that if you're going to Agile, your only job is to ask questions. You cannot tell anything anymore. You're now a leader in Agile, so you need to ask questions. And so this person asked, like, what do you expect from me? What do I need to do? And this manager said, what do you think? Did not help this person at all. He had to find out, but he was actually looking for an answer for creating confidence and competence. And this manager saying, no, but I cannot tell you what to do because we're not Agile. So now I'm going to ask you these questions. This did not help him at all. So I think steering behavior and being a manager, although having a negative feeling sometimes, can actually be good when it helps people to get a certain competence, which creates authority and autonomy in the end.
You know what? When you mentioned that the management bit, Ellis, it reminded me of a paper I read once a year ago. You're probably familiar with it, by Richard Hackman. He has a paper called "Psychology of Self-Management in Organizations," and he is also adamant that he doesn't believe in leadership, as he said, or in management, because you need it, because the team need the structure to help them. So autonomy is not something that you can just give them. You have to foster that. And I believe he listed. I have a Twitter thread on it, but I can list 5 points that he mentioned. You need an overall direction for the work, so it's clear and engaging. You need a structure for the performance, for unit fostering and competent performance. The organization context, you need to put the team in a context, and you have expert coaching and consulting available, and material and resources needed. There's like 5 points, and this was in '86. And as you said, this is nothing new here. I mean, it goes back to
we're just not good at
go
it.
all the way back. Yeah, exactly. We still don't have a good. Yeah.
Well, is it also a bit, and I've been reading into that, isn't it also a polarity that you're dealing with, right? And I always feel like we're flipping from, right, we need top-down approach to so centralized versus decentralized. For me, it's a polarity. You need both, but when do you actually make the switch so that you're being in the positive sides of both? Isn't that what's going on now again? That it's being switched to the other side, and maybe in 10 years, we need to go back again, which is not good because you want to stay somewhere in the middle.
Why?
What?
It's a tendency. It's a tendency in almost every subject that you move from left to right. If you look into this history of most of the companies, there's almost all the time a tendency to, and then we're going to centralize, and then we're going to decentralize, and then we do. So there's always those polarities. And I think the reason why they're there is because we don't have agreement on what the best method is. There's no such thing as the best method. So we constantly move away from one polarity to the other. It's just because we evolve. which I think is just in the nature of the company to keep on evolving.
Yeah, and what I mean by that is, shouldn't we be better at managing that? Of staying on the positive side of both sides. That's what I meant, right? So it's
that's
that you.
Yeah, so that's the first step, that you actually see they both have their advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah.
So Jay Bloom explains this through the commons, and thinking about the commons. So if you think about technology, there are components that benefit from being shared, or let's put it, the organization or the system as a whole gets more value when they're shared. And there's other stuff that you better keep localized to your teams. And so if we say that there isn't a best method or so, it's also because context changes all the time. So you have to reevaluate what is best at different times. And so you need to sometimes recommon things and then you decommon them again, because the value shifts. So
Exactly.
they're both valuable for different things, and you need to evaluate the value all the time to know what's the right thing. And so what organizations do wrong is basically that they take a static view, and depending on who's at the top says this is the method we should follow, rather than actually being led by the context.
Yeah.
Which I actually think, Mark, is also about competence. And so there's this idea that you need to have a right vision on where to go, and then that is where, and you need to stick to it. Well, actually being aware of the fact that indeed the value shift and that you need to evolve as well is what you need to stick to. So that's also about competence, and I think the insecurity of many of managers and leaders at the top.
Thank you.
That reminds me of another thing that I think Ruth Malan tipped me on. I don't remember Ulrich, I think it was. Because I've been into business capabilities for quite some time, as you many already know. And that has also evolved, like systems has become general system thinking, capabilities have become the same. There is a meta level on top of that. So there's something they call organizational capabilities, which is basically the organization's capability to adjust to changing environments and changing competitions and all that stuff. And so I believe that's probably what you're pointing at, Alice, that they are lacking that part. And that's probably something that you need to foster. I don't know, maybe a new boss coming in having that mindset. I don't know. I haven't seen companies switching from one to the other, though. I've only been stuck in the old way. So I'm trying to get the old companies out of that hierarchy. But,
so I think that for me, the Bible almost is Brené Brown's Power of Vulnerability, which really changed my leadership style. Because admitting that you don't always have the right answer and that you need to evolve because of the value shift requires a certain vulnerability. And that is not something that we feel good with, to sit in that vulnerability. But also, which I thought was very interesting, which I heard in one of her podcasts of Brené Brown, is we did not actually learn. We don't have the words to say how we feel. We're not emotionally very evolved in describing that. We know mad, glad, and sad. But how about all the other colors to give that a certain feeling? We're not really good at it. We were not raised like that, and especially not as leaders. So that requires, to deal with those polarities and to deal with this kind of uncertainty, it requires a vulnerability. That is not something which is in the vocabulary, literally, of leaders.
So we have to practice poetry.
Yeah, and that's what I diving into that. That's what I also see usually, and we discuss it. And you see it as a triangle. I see it as the power, love, polarity, and it doesn't really matter. But I see usually especially the enterprises, there's too much in Western society, the power, and less what you just say, right? So, and we need both again.
And that's because there's the gathering of power, but just like Ellis says, I don't think it always seems to move in one direction. It doesn't ever, you rarely see people giving up power. Power can be taken from people, but you don't see them kind of actually going, me having the power is the wrong place for this power to be. So whenever I go in my current project, there's me and another lead architect, and we've set them up 5 teams. Eventually we've kind of scaled. So there's now far more architecture to be done than 2 human beings can do. So that's, we have the power, that's our right to make those decisions. We immediately kind of set in place, which is the thing I tweeted about in the Twitter thread. We were like, how can we keep the, change the dynamic of how these decisions get made to give the power to make the decisions to other people, but still keeping, we obviously have lots of knowledge and SME experience and domain knowledge and things. How can we can't give that away because we have it and it's in our heads and we need to share it, but we can give the power to make decisions away, and figuring out a structure. And like you said, Ellis, to give that step by step so that people can take it when they're ready, as opposed to just kind of going, well, you make all the decisions, we're incapable. That's equally bad, right? So finding out a way to make that, to do that. The other thing we've noticed is, though, if we gave away the power, we're now making sure that the rest of the organization can't come back in and take it, because we've left a space where technically the people with the power, it doesn't belong to them from a traditional hierarchical perspective. So we're now expending quite a lot of time making sure that bureaucracy doesn't come in from another angle in elsewhere in the organization, to take that power away from the teams that have learned to use it in the various ways, because that's quite hard. Protecting the space we've cleared of bureaucracy, and we've failed sometimes, but we've learned other things. That's quite difficult, clearing the space. And we're lucky. We've got the CEO we speak to regularly, and he kind of understands what we're doing. He can see the benefit of it. But I've been other places where you set all this stuff up and then someone comes in, like someone changes job, someone high up in the hierarchy, and they don't like the fact that it feels like everyone's doing it, so they tell everyone to stop doing it. So
so there's that
I think this is pure leadership, to share power and not give it away and say, okay, it's not my responsibility anymore. Here is it, you have it, even if you don't want it, go. This is not leadership. This is throwing over the fence. Leadership is, would you like to share with me? Would you like to learn? I can coach you. I am here if you need me, but you can do it. This is what Ellis said, give confidence and the feeling. Yeah. And this is not hard. I have really hard time to understand why it's so hard to.
I think it is hard. So power actually means that you have accountability and responsibility. So you're given a position in which some people expect things from you. And yes, so it is one of the most enabling moves, that if you have this position, that you let other people come in and decision and maybe even defer to their competence and maturity if they actually have it and you recognize it. But what you're doing, so my term, and apologies for the swearing, but what they are is shit umbrellas, yeah? Mm-hmm. So in normal corporate life, how this actually plays out is that they're dealing with the crap that comes from hierarchical position and from hierarchical structure in order to enable people to actually step up and exercise their competence and maturity. But ultimately, the accountability through the organization's governance still lies with that person. So I also rather prefer to talk about authority than leadership, because leadership is something completely contextual, has nothing to do or shouldn't have anything to do with where you sit in the hierarchy and what power authorities you're being given.
Yeah.
What I very, very much like, and I like what you just said, Andrew, on you give away power. You never stop wanting to have power. So I learned from a professor of mine, he talked about the infinity triangle of anxiety, power, and love. Because anxiety without love is isolating and terribly lonely. But anxiety without power is the curse of victimhood. So, and power without love is oppressive and brutal. And power without anxiety is just manipulative and sociopathic. And then last, love without power is anemic and sentimental. And love without anxiety is the denial of reality. You need these three. As a leader, you need to be comfortable with anxiety, with power, and with love. And only then that is true leadership. But that is really difficult.
I've written that down actually. I'm going to keep that on a post-it note.
I have a slide for you.
Oh, this is going to.
Yeah, please share.
So, yeah, I got a bit. So the question there is, there was a counterpoint by Romeo given. So power is given and power is also shared, right?
I think traditionally that's true, but so I did a talk called Organization Refactoring and Culture Hacking, and so one of the parts of that talk was beyond delegation, because the typical way, again, in the Western world, in like hierarchical organizations, which is how we think we have to organize things, but it's only one way of doing it. Hierarchical organizations, you delegate, so you kind of, but you don't give the power and the responsibility, you just give the toil and the work to someone else. Whereas, and this coming from Scotland, it's kind of relevant at the moment, devolution, or even more, right? Like, federation or something, which is more moving towards the anarchistic political view of looking at things. Then you don't give the solution which needs to be enacted to someone. You give them the problem and the power and the responsibility to kind of solve it for themselves, and then they can go off and do it. But we typically, I think, in my experience, when I got promoted, I got taught how to delegate, and then I realized that I was just spreading my pain around. I wasn't spreading the ability to be creative, the ability to kind of solve problems and things. And because that's how we do things, right? Whereas I think if you give, if you devolve the problem and the power to solve that problem, and maybe the resources we talked a little bit about, you need to have the resources to be able to solve things as well. That kind of dynamic, how you can change those things is kind of interesting to me, because otherwise it's just me giving you a job to do. But I don't want to give you a job to do. I want to get your creativity on the problem. I want to get your, if it's an architectural problem, I want someone else to look at the requirements and come up with their solution, not me to come up with it in my head and then tell them to build it. That's the kind of the dynamic. But I don't think we do that very frequently.
Yeah.
Agree.
So coming in, so I see Miroslav on YouTube saying, consider the fact that modern software teams have much more responsibility and deal with much more critical information than 10 to 15 years ago. Is it natural that their role will be more important than in traditional hierarchical structure? So it was first and foremost a supporting role. So IT is seen as a supporting role, but now these days software is business. So, and those who understand it most are those who produce it. So is that also, well, if I ask the question correctly, is that also causing the shift now for the need? And
are we ready for the shift, right?
Yeah. Good point.
Like, we're asking for more responsibility, but like Ellis said, maybe there's even more coming our way. Like, the entire loss of a business is dependent on us getting this stuff right.
Yeah. So going into that, so we first went into you cannot give someone autonomy if they don't want it. But I've also come into a lot of cases, and Christina, you said this leadership is easy, but looking into my surroundings, and I'm a bit biased because I'm a consultant and they hire me when things aren't going well. So I'm biased there. But what I usually see is like they want more authority, but they're not given more authority. So this is the other part, right? So why does that happen? And you can have all sorts of nice identification and metaphors like ivory tower architects or management from above. And so anyone has an explanation why the other way around isn't working? Teams want to have more authority, but they're not given more authority.
It's about control.
Short answer.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yes. And it's you need to create a culture of collaboration, which is really difficult because it requires trust, it requires time. And in my research, when I interviewed managers of departments going to Agile, time, just being on the floor, not constantly in meetings. Only when you have enough time, you can foster collaboration, which is one of the most important leadership behaviors. So being around where it happens. And I think that also is true for architects. Time. Spend time with the teams, know what's going on there, create a culture of collaboration and trust. But we don't spend enough time on that.
Yeah, that was again in my thread. That's Ruth Mallon and Dana Breedemeyer, right? That's their definition of architecture is making sure the right conversations happen with the right people at the right time. That's the that's the job of the architect, and maybe it's kind of asking some correct questions to make sure it's the right conversations, etc. But that's it. Like you say, and you don't do that if you're not engaged, if you're not with the people who have all the context and have all the details and know all of the the low level, what the code looks like, what it's actually like to run this stuff. So
yeah,
and I think you're on to why I must admit I'm quite pessimistic when it comes to like these agile transformations, and especially in large old organizations, because there's so much power structure that you have to actually not remove necessarily, but you have to reshape completely. And doing that, well, maybe you need a new CEO coming in and just saying, like Bezos, saying, no, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to do that, and just forcing everybody to walk into a new direction. I'm not sure, because I've been in the same situation, but of course not in that high level, but in just simply in a team. Being an architect, being hired in as a consultant, you are the solution architect. So you design the solution that these people are going to solve, right, going to build. And just getting out of that mindset for them is hard. It took me a year before the team was sort of self-governing, and I was just helping them with architecture. I wasn't running any architecture. I was helping them to design the architecture. And that takes a lot of time.
So I think here that teams and architects can be more political. Because in the end, why do managers and leaders behave as the way they do? Because they want to control. Why do they want to control? Because they're afraid that they might lose their jobs, that they cannot pay for their mortgage, that etc.
It's systemic. Yeah, exactly.
So when a team is able to show the manager, if you give us more autonomy, I can make you more successful. That's definitely the way to get more going. So sometimes we also need to be a little bit smarter and a little bit perhaps more political. In the end, it's always about aligning strategies. So if when you as a team want to have more autonomy and more impact, align your strategy with that of your manager, and you're going to get more autonomy.
Yeah, you have to game the system actually to sort of could get to that position. I think that's how I did. For example, there is nothing more in the world that triggers me more than estimates, asking for estimates. Maybe safe, but estimates is even worse. And that triggers something. I get goosebumps just saying it, because it triggers me in because it's so dysfunctional. Because the reason why I ask is because they don't trust me. They want an estimate so they can not necessarily keep you at it, but they want to have some sort of control, feel of control. So, and I always thought, these annoying project managers, they just want to make my life miserable. But no, they're not. They are in a systemic problem because they are asked to report to the steering committee or whatever that is. So there are turtles all the way up. I don't know. So you have to game it. As you said, you have to. If you discuss with the team, okay, let's just show them that we deliver stuff. Let's get things out the door.
But
if you do that, they do so.
But the opposite is true as well. And I think that is what I was meant with anxiety. So I came from this big corporate, and I had to report. And I had managers asking me for progress and maturity models and how agile are your teams, and are you improving in time to market, etc., etc. And so then suddenly I went into Xebia, and I got a responsibility for a unit with my own profit and loss statement, which actually means that I'm responsible for what I'm making for money and what I'm spending. And so I went to the CFO to ask for an investment. And he looked at me like, what do you want from me? Approval? It's your business. It's your responsibility. And that was frightening. I recalculated it 3 times.
But you did the best job.
And that,
but
it's something that I was not used to. And then suddenly it's my decision and I'm responsible for it. While in a big corporate, it's really easy to come up with an idea and then just go into all those steering boards, because then responsibility is not with me anymore, because somebody else said it was a good idea.
And Alice, also you need to, all the budget you're getting for a year, you need to drain that, because next year you won't get it, right?
Yeah.
And there's always a little bit more money, right?
It's like playing poker without money.
Exactly.
I don't care. Next year I'll get maybe the same one. But now you're actually...
But I can say that I wanted this job myself, but I didn't realize that responsibility. And that is really, really frightening. And I got better in it because I got into a situation where collaboration was fostered and there was trust. But it's a frightening thing. And I can imagine in organizations that haven't been responsible in this way, and they suddenly get this responsibility without being helped and guided in that. That's frightening.
Yeah.
Sure, but why?
I would like to quickly come in on that thing about estimates and control, because
go.
It's too one-sided here. So I totally agree that the dysfunctions that you describe exist and that they're quite common, but it's not true that that's always the case and that you should always be worried about estimates. So there's various ways of estimating that we have come up with through the Agile that are less painful and less committal, as in, we think we give you a size of a thing. We're not promising that that's the size of the thing because we haven't discovered it yet. But the reason in general we have mechanisms of control and sometimes do need to have an understanding of size of things is that we need to coordinate. And so I saw in the blurb, or maybe in the thread a little bit, that you're also bashing command and control. And as with all these things, there's times and places where this is necessary. So having some sort of a hierarchical control allows an organization to move much faster, which is important when you're trying to capture value in a marketplace that only exists for a certain period of time, because if you're not going to go there, others will go there. And so, so my metaphor is like you're on a ship, You don't want to have a negotiation at the bottom, so where everybody is holding rudders or sails, where to go. You ask the guy at the lookout who can see further than everybody, say, where's the land? Where should we go? And you will follow that. So this kind of coordination, I mean, we could also go down the Elliot Jaques route and says there's a people, their job is, and they have learned to talk in these stories that have a longer time spans. And they have practices to understand what happens in these longer time spans. So equally also, if you want to go live with a piece of software that the public is consuming as a large organization, there are other parts in the organization that need to be ready to support you, publication, helplines, etc. They all need to be ready. So coordination is an important bit. And so I'm all in favor for, let's do a little bit of estimating so we can coordinate better. Let's give the people who allow us to move faster the control so they can steer us in the right direction. But equally, yes, we have to balance it when this becomes abusive, as Ellis said, when actually the need actually isn't there and they're still exercising these kind of powers.
Well, that's also...
And just a record, I agree with you, Mark, but there are other tools as well than estimation. But let's go. Let's not bring this to estimation.
Well, that was also Socrates' defense against democracy, right? If we lose the captain of the ship, I want someone able to get us to shore, and not some populistic vote of the entire ship there. So there's two sides.
I think that's something that another thing I've thought about. So like some of the things I thought about is the things that Ellis mentioned at the start. Other things I think about are, and this comes from Drucker. So Drucker talks about there are many, possible organizational models, but we have one, and it comes from a kind of military background, right? And it's hierarchical, it's command and control, and in very many circumstances, the ones that Mark described, for example, they are the ideal formulation to have for an organization, but it's only one. So what's interesting to me is, why do we only see that one, or in 99% of circumstances see that one, and why don't we see things like, to go back to what we talked about a minute ago? You would think that we would have evolved in how we structure organizations, a way of kind of refactoring or even, coping with multiple cultures or multiple types of organization within one body, but we seem to have to pick one, and it's that one, and it never changes. But what's interesting to me is how we can pick something which, you know, can evolve, and we, when it needs to be command and control, because we've got to move fast and we've just all got to just do what this one person says. Other times, can we go slower? Can we, you know, sense and orient ourselves from the masses and all that kind of stuff, the people, you know, down at the you know, writing the code and stuff. And why, but what interests me is we never seem to change that thing. And I think maybe it's cultural again. This is what we expect. And that's kind of how we staff and how we hire people and what people expect when they come. So ThoughtWorks isn't like this, but it's interesting. We're growing, and so we're hiring lots of people. So people come in with the mental model of a hierarchical organization, and they spend 6 months getting their head around it. And if they can't get their head around the fact they don't have a manager, they leave, typically. Loads of people leave after 6 months because they're like, where's my boss? You don't have a boss. And if that doesn't compute, they leave the company. So,
but this is how it should be, isn't it? This is there are places for people who wanted hierarchy, and there should be places for people who want to work together, to sit on this ship and understand that if the manager can do his work, if I don't do my work, it won't work out. And other way around. And this other way around is what I am missing.
Yeah.
To understanding, you cannot tell me, that's just like I heard yesterday, in our plans, it's written, these 3 features must will go online. Really? Please sit down and build them. I don't know nothing about this. Either you are talking with me, or they won't go online. You cannot refer to a paper and say this will happen. You must understand I am on the same boat, and we are not on the same boat, and it drives me crazy. They don't see that we are on the same boat. There are 2 boats. One for managers and one for the rest on the bottom of the safe diagram. It's one boat. And this is why I say it's not easy, but it cannot be so hard to understand. It's just like the guy said on YouTube, software is not an adjacent thing anymore. Software makes things going, makes companies successful, but the managers seem to oversee this.
So the reason why, so Drucker writes a little bit about this, but anthropology is actually more interesting as a source. So the reason why we often have this problem that there's a belief there must be one right form of organization, there must be one right form of culture, is somewhat a Western, almost probably a Christian problem. So
it probably is.
We come from a culture that says there is one set of moral values that's right for everyone.
So it's Protestant, right? It's Protestantism as well. It's very, it's not even,
And as soon as you go out,
gods are not fallible.
White Western world, you actually already find all this diversity in organization quite quickly. But it's also then how we interpret what happens. So that was one of the things that Drucker realized is, he looked actually at some organizations in the history and said, the way managers in the academic management literature have written about it was through that prism of how close do they get to this one ideal organization? Whereas actually what he saw was actually a lot of diversity and started to peel out what are the benefits. And that's what he says. He writes quite clearly about you have to be very contextual in how you manage. So different people need different management styles at different times, etc., etc.
It's interesting.
But I think there are 2 things. One, it means that at a certain moment in time, you need to say you were wrong, which requires
what used to work has stopped working.
You need to. It requires reflection and vulnerability, and also I think this is the idea of economy sunk costs. We already invested so much in it. If we stop now, we already invested so much in it. I really like that idea of sunk cost. It's done. Make that decision. Stop that contract. Do it different. It's sunk cost. But that's something that we have very much difficulties with just by nature.
Yeah. So it's interesting, Mark, you mentioned anthropology. People who know me know my wife's educated in it, and I've done some reading about it. And there's this interesting book that looks at other cultures of non-Western enterprise cultures, where how is decision being made there? And what they're saying actually is that it's actually okay that other people make decisions for you. People are just fine for people making decisions for them. That's usually not the problem. And the problem is, are they feeling heard, or is their opinion important, or are they being valued, or
Agency.
And one thing that goes wrong in enterprises, what I see, I don't mind giving people, well, in this case, Alice is my manager, I'm not sure about the rest, but I don't mind people earning more money. But when shit hits the fan, they should protect me as well. And that's usually what goes wrong. I'm not saying it goes wrong in my current company, but in my previous companies, you have CEOs leaving the building with tons of money. And we're like, what? You're here to protect me. Yeah, you're here to protect me and not abandon ship, right? So that's what I find interesting.
Have you got the title of the book? Because that sounds interesting.
It's called The Corporate Tribe. It's by Jitske Kramer and Danielle Brown, two Dutch cultural anthropologists turned enterprise.
Maybe you can put it in the chat.
Yeah, they're looking at non-enterprise, so non-corporate cultures, and see, and their theory is like, everything we're facing in the corporate, we already solved it outside the corporate world. We just forgotten it and we just didn't learn. So their most interesting one I find is a meeting called the Kgotla, where you have a chief posing a problem to their people. I'm not saying you should do this straight away, but I find it just interesting. And then everyone can just dump what they think. And then at the end, the chief will make a decision. And well, that's the short version. I've done this once. It was very interesting. And
your wife won.
My wife is always right. So
that's I mean, true. One of the things when we were doing our kind of anarchistic approach to architecture, we took a thing from trust organizations, the Lalou book, which is advice process. So anyone was empowered to make any decision they wanted to, but the two rules were they had to ask the advice, get the advice of, so not just, to Ellis's point, they would have to go and seek the opinions and advice of other people. And those two groups of people were people who would be affected or impacted and people with expertise. And then they were still free to make any decision they wanted. And we added an extra thing, so they'd have to write an ADR. So therefore, they would have to decide it. They'd have to write the context of the decision. They had to write all the advice they were given, even if they ignored it. And then they would be publicly signing up to the fact. But it was their decision and they couldn't be questions on it. And so we had to build the culture of the fact that it was up to them and they could do what they wanted. And to just exactly to Ellis's point, it was very slow to begin with. So we modeled the process by doing all of our decisions like that. And then people started coming up to step up to take it. And as more people stepped up, other people stepped up. But it got better decisions faster. They were quicker decisions. So they were therefore, we made them with less kind of, they were faster, right? So we got quicker decisions. What was good was then when they were wrong, because we'd invested less organizational time and effort in making them, we could remake them and change them if we needed to. And that was good because again, this whole thing where we put lots of the hierarchy or whatever, the culture of how we make decisions, if it's important, we take a long time to make it and it's an expensive decision. We accidentally, we didn't even do it on purpose, right? We just got to the point where it was easier and quicker to make lots of decisions and then change them, and we could find the things and we could kind of get to the bigger decisions quite quickly. So that was quite interesting. It's interesting, like the reason I'm mentioning it is because lots of stuff that Ellis and Mark as well have pointed out, we kind of stumbled across it by accident. And I think it doesn't come from Western culture, right? That's not I don't think that's
I would also wonder how until what number for an organization will this work?
That's exactly what this organization, the team is about 150 strong and it still works. But I very much agree that I think it will break at some point because we're a program within an organization. Because I think Trond pointed out that at some point that's going to break. And I'd like to know when. I ought to be around when it breaks because that would be a bad responsibility to kind of say that people should do this and then leave.
Well, this reminds me of the Twitter thread that started this all.
Yeah.
And it was something that you mentioned, Mark, saying if you still think Dunbar, and Dunbar is a hot topic,
yep.
Right? It's also mentioned in team topology. I mention it as well. But you're saying if you still think Dunbar is useful for management, have a listen, please, to this recording. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? Because that's an interesting, counter.
That's I think a talk by David Vengro and David Graeber. So there are two. So Graeber's no longer with us. People in the UK might know Graeber also as a political activist, so they are actually. So the first criticism about Dunbar is basically that the whole research is about apes.
Yeah.
About, Dunbar's hands-on research wasn't. He didn't use humans. He used apes, and so automatically saying, these kind of. So anything that then he projected in humans is correlation, not. It wasn't observational science. But then they also have lots of evidence that they're actually saying, so when you say the number and the size is a limitation, that's again what we're used to and what we learned to believe. It's not true. So just going to use an easier example that everybody knows is Roman culture. So Roman citizens were very willing to fluctuate between two states which are fundamentally different types of organization. They were very willing to go into an army and go and conquer and adhere to command and control and take command and even risk their lives under that. And then they would come home and be citizens. Yeah. And this was fluctuating. You weren't just for a short period of time a soldier and then you were a citizen for the rest of your life. You were literally a few years you're soldiers, then you were a few citizens, then you go back being a soldier, etc., depending on the needs of your family and Rome as a whole, etc. So what David Graeber and David Wenger show in their research is that's actually human history. That fluctuating between different social entities is normal. I mean, we could also talk about Brené Brown, who points out that we're different people in different contexts. That we can be terribly vulnerable when we're around our friends and not vulnerable at all at work and be the same person. And as an individual, don't see actually how we're different in the two environments. So I often actually say, if you want to enable these things, and so this is the complexity view, is it depends what kind of constraints you're under. So people's behavior, so I have this aversion. So you shouldn't try to explain people's behavior by introspecting their inner life psychology. You should try to understand people's behavior by what constraints you have given them. What constraints are they reacting to? First of all, you can actually be much more acting on constraints. So there's much more things that you can do than actually psychologically influence people to become different people. That's much, much harder. So several sessions or several episodes of psychotherapy speaking here that I know how much time you have to commit one-on-one to actually really, if you want to change some parts of your behavior that way, it's possible. But nobody goes to work saying, hey, I'm willing to become psychologically changed. So I haven't signed up to psychological therapy when I signed my working contract, but people are well willing to engage to different constraints, especially if you actually start negotiating some of them. As in, so in complexity science, we say what's really enabling is where constraints and the systems on which they're acting, there's feedback loops. So what that means is, okay, you maybe give some boundaries, but then you actually ask the people, so how did they feel to you? Which part of what of the work became easier? What became harder? And you adjust the boundary so that they consistently become more productive. Yeah. So having this whole constraints view is first of all more actionable, but it is also more interactive, more collaborative. And what it leads to, if you follow it, and I had the luxury to have a few times the power in larger organization to make some of these things happen, is actually wider collaboration across bigger parts of an organization. And suddenly you realize, this 150 number from Dunbar is literally irrelevant. So I've seen this happening across 2,500 people. Yeah, so you just change the constraints and they all of a sudden say, hey, we can collaborate more, we see more agency. I mean, that's not their words, but when you listen to the retro comments, etc., that's what comes out.
Yeah. I'm going to keep pushing. It's interesting because I think there's a thing in Edgar Schein's Fifth Discipline, and his same thing. He's you put the same people in different people in the same situations, you'll get the same results. So it's not the people, it's the circumstances and the systems that they're in, right? So
Yeah, that's also in Donella H. Meadows, right?
That's it, Donella.
Yeah, she says that if you change teachers in a university, it's still the same university, still the same behavior. Probably it didn't really change a lot. If you want to pivot something, you need something totally different.
It gives a very pessimistic idea of whether we can help organizations to change.
Yeah, but remember, she also had that list of those leverage points.
Yeah, so the leverage points work, and it's what's interesting again, because this was the talk I gave. Some of the leverage points are tiny, but they can have a spectacular. Like with Mark said, with the like you'll know this, Ellis, as well, right? If you engage a positive feedback loop, things can. And again, I've learned from consulting and transformations. When we've failed, or when I've failed, it's because we've engaged something which I thought we were doing something, but a negative feedback loop, the pushback against whatever we're trying to do because of lack of, agency or whatever, it feels like it's being imposed on people. They push back. So they actively reinforce where they are, even though nobody likes it, because they don't understand, or they don't like where they think they're being led to or pushed in the direction of. So trying to find the small things that will enable a different change in the system. It's still not easy, but I've realized that stop pushing something sometimes, or even step back. Like I said, with all of the stuff we did with the architecture and things, we cleared the space for them to take it up. We didn't push it to them. We kind of we made space for them to do it. So
exactly, this is what to do, isn't it? To make place for others, and then if this place won't be filled, then okay, people don't need this, they don't want this, nobody should push them there. I worked this way 2 years, and we had our boss gave us the money and said, here's the budget. And I asked you at the end of the year, and he did, why you didn't spend it. This is crazy. And I asked him a lot of times, why did you do this? He gave us everything. This is your floor. These are the people. We hire the people. We decided with whom we work or not. We moved people out of our place. We made the recruitment process a leaving process. Nobody was the boss. We were everybody on the same level, and we had a product to make. That's it. And he gave us the budget and the questions. Why don't you spend the budget? Why don't you go to workshops? Why don't you learn how it's going with the product? What do you need? This was the biggest question. What do you need? Tell me, what do you need? Here is it. But then I want responsibility, and we were happy to have this.
Yeah.
And we had this space created. He created us the space, and we filled it.
Yeah, freedom and responsibility, right? Because the two things go hand in hand. You can't have
and that's the negotiation or not. So that's a example of a negotiation there on the boundary.
Yeah,
am I correct?
It wasn't enough. We should have asked for more stakeholdership, for more management. This was one guy. He was on the C level, but still it was one. And he didn't tell us all the time, okay, you should have move faster or do something. So we wake up with the management asking, what, you are not done yet? That's it. So he protected us too much. We should have more challenging from the whole management. And what we didn't have was marketing. It was totally out of our control, and for them it wasn't skin in the game. And legal stuff. We needed months for legal, because they wasn't, for them it was the same. This is what I learned. If it's not your skin in the game, then it's only a task for you. You won't make this extra mile. You don't work. It's not you are not interested. And this is how I started to learn to love autonomy. You are interested. You want to be successful. It's only a task, because it's not your responsibility. It won't be. It will fail.
I'd very much like to go to respond on this, because we started with, is autonomy a right word, or should we go to agency? Because if you tell a team, I want you to take autonomy, I want you to take responsibility, what does that mean? how does it look like? I very much like the organizational behavior management look on this, that we need to define what we expect from people. And that defining that behavior is really, really difficult, because when we're talking about all these statuses and being transparent, what does that mean? How does it look like? What do I do when I'm transparent? And having these kind of discussions, like what do you actually expect from me, and admitting to the fact that is very difficult to define, that is, I think, really a way to get out of these kind of things, to really define the boundaries of what you mean by autonomy or control or anything like that. And I think, Christine, what you just said is really easy. Like, this is what you've been expecting from me, and this is not. That actually is helping a lot.
Yeah. He was very clear. He gave us all the rest.
There is something that I took away from the Akov book that I recommended to you, Andrew, I believe. I'm not sure if you started reading it.
Yeah, I haven't started reading it yet, but there's a
backlog. Yeah, it's really good. He has a distinction between different types of system. He said that there are essentially 3 types of system. He said that there's a 4th, but that's just a combination of the other 3. And you have the deterministic system, which is typically like a machine. It doesn't have, and he say that what distinguishes is the parts and the whole, if they have purpose or not. So the deterministic machine doesn't have a purpose. The parts doesn't have a purpose, and the whole doesn't have a purpose. We give it purpose, but on its own, it doesn't have a purpose. And then you got animate, as you say, animate system, that's like us. The whole has a purpose, but the different parts of us doesn't have a purpose. And then it goes, the next one is the social systems, and that is teams, right? So the teams have purpose, so that the whole has a purpose, and also the parts have a purpose. The people in there has purpose. And if you're gonna model that kind of systems, you have to do. We can't use the old machine age model anymore. And I think that the old model with the, I mean, I think he has even mentioned that the word corporation comes from corpus, like it's a body. So the model is that the organization is a body, and the head is the management. That's the leadership. So I mean, we're using the wrong model for this new type of organization thing. We should go for social systems, and they are completely different than these hierarchical systems. I like this. But the point there is that there's a purpose. So everybody here has a purpose, and a team, everybody has a purpose. So I refer to what you said, Christina, that when you are given a purpose, the team rallies around that purpose. Even the individual rallies around that purpose. So I think purpose is a really central thing.
The craziest thing was we had juniors to very seniors, and all of them were burning for this. They were on fire. Yeah. Doesn't matter the experience. We decided who to hire. HR was out of the game, and we made the interviews, and the only question was, do you want to move something? Do you want to achieve something? Or do you want to be told what to do? Because then it's the wrong
people
place.
do, right? Some
people
sure,
it's totally okay. It's totally fine. It's just not that place.
And I mean, because Patty McCord's book about like Powerful, about how they do HR at Netflix is interesting. And again, they're like, there's times the organization you're working in might be the type of organization for you, and at some point it might change and not be the organization for you. And then they encourage, they pay people to leave and encourage them to go and all those things. And that's sometimes I think we think that you hire someone and then they need to stay. But I know someone who's been to been to Netflix 3 times because they like the dynamic change bits. So they worked on when they went to the cloud and worked on the streaming stuff. And then they kind of embedded that, and then it was, doing all the ruggedization and the anti-fragile stuff. That was a bit more boring, so she left. Then they start doing something else crazy again, so she goes back. I think it's something to do with machine learning, right? And then that got set up, so it was, it went back, kind of slowed down again, and so she left. And now she's gone back again, but she joins the phase of the organization that she enjoys and she's most productive in, and she leaves when it kind of gets to other things. So that's kind of
and that reminds me of Wardley with his 3 types of teams.
Yeah,
because she was obviously not she was not a town planner. She was a pioneer.
Yeah, exactly right. She loves, and that's the thing. She goes to do startups in between, so she loves that stuff. But she'd rather she likes, because this is the thing, and is that you can't. I think as you get more aware of these things, again, what you like and what you don't like, and what you want and what you don't want. finding, you know, a startup is good, but there's no money in there. You're constantly under the kind of pressure to do things. Whereas if you've got a longer runway, if you're somewhere like Netflix, or they'll give you more freedom, or there might be more people to work with, right? So she likes the combination of both, as far as I can tell, putting words into her mouth. But, you know, that seems to be, so she's got the longer runway. She's got, you know, endless loads of smart people, and they're all local as well, because Netflix are all, you know, until recently we're all in one location. So that was good for her. And then other times she'd leave and go and do other stuff. So.
So question to you. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Pick up something Trond said, just because that's a common misconception that, so you were talking about the mechanistic models that we have about organizations. And I think we know for a long time that we need to overcome them. So Drucker wrote a book in '56 saying management is a social practice. Yeah. So all his work, he says, the work is a social place, and you could go back to Bourdieu, etc. That's all they make clear. Yet we keep going back to these mechanistic models, and so this is now my riff, and it might be wrong, but I believe so. Machines don't exist in nature. Humans came up with it, and basically it is our way of simplifying what we see working in the world. Yeah, so we can't really grasp with the complexity of biological life, or for a long time we couldn't. Maybe we get slowly better at it. So we're abstracting what we're learning into machines, and equally so when we have these mechanistical models about organization, it's because the real complexity is almost impossible to share or communicate, etc. So we have these abstractions, and they always have this mechanistical nature. And so then actually the way to overcome it is to be aware that we have the tendency. So whenever we abstract, whenever we simplify, whenever we create a model, and the Wordley model for me goes into the same thing, is we're simplifying what really is. Yeah. And we have to understand that, as Wordley says, no map is perfect. Yeah. You can't do the perfect map. Equally, so for example, pioneer settler town planner, I've experienced all three. So I don't think you're limited, but of course, so what these cultures have are practices, and of course, if you're very good at certain practices, you might have a propensity looking for environments where you can either reproduce the practices or even get better at them, like an artist who continues wants to get better at some very limited number of practices. That doesn't mean you have to be limited, or we should expect people to be limited to that. That is personal choice. I mean, I'm not saying everybody has to go through all three. Or, I mean, Simon would actually admit that probably there's fluent, so there's more than three. Three is just a good way of abstracting what the fluency between those cultures are. Again, because of the limitations of the brain and language, etc., of conceptualizing these things.
Yeah, and that's usually the problems what you see with these models, right? They're usually taking into account that that's how we should, or that's the reality. Look at MBTI, right? Myers-Briggs. It has value, but people like creating teams around their MBTI, and well, you're now this MBTI. Like, what? I'm complex.
It's got value for getting
I change. It's not even scientific. But you know, this is the tendency we have. Again, same with estimation there, which are useful, but we have the tendency to see them as
because it's like we look for like it's interesting that, like, again, what Ella said at the start about we reduce it to the mechanistic elements as well, right? So you know, like love you don't see in things, and like fuzziness you don't see in things. You see three clear definitions, right? You see, or four or five or something, but you don't. The fuzziness and the gaps and the fact that things change and aren't very solid, etc., we don't tend to have. Whereas that's where all of the empathy and the human beings live, and that kind of, I think, you know, it's being sensitive to that kind of stuff. That's where you can succeed or fail. I think, in my experience,
that's where all successful models fail, is when people take the eye off where the model breaks, as that they suddenly assume universality, and no model has. You have to constantly look out and see, okay, is reality seeping in, and how do we accommodate it if it does?
And that's
can I just ask you one question? Because, you know, there's this negative connotation with management and leadership. But when I joined CBA, I was looking for a leader, because that's how I learn. I want to be in an environment where there's a leader who can teach me, where I can strive, where I can excel. because I'm looking for a leader who is going to make that culture. So this is a question to you. Do you want to have a leader or not?
To
Well, as
whom?
individuals.
Question to whom?
To all of you,
Oh, okay.
to the panelists.
Go, Christina.
I want a leader, a real leader, like this guy. He was the scrum master in our company and then became a leader. But for me, he was always a friend. It wasn't a boss. I always make fun of him, of his titles, and he was always angry. So it wasn't a boss-employee relationship. It was a real leadership, and he was listening to me. We wrote an article together. So it was something totally mutual. It was a pure leadership. He wanted to know everything, never rejected anything. We need these kinds of people. We have to.
Yeah, I agree. I think
That's you need leadership, right?
Leader. Yeah. I don't disagree there.
Yeah.
So Andrew, you said that within your organization you don't have.
We don't have managers. Yeah, we don't have. So we do. Well, so we do. We have tenure, which we're aware of. So the longer you've been at ThoughtWorks, so there's two things. There's tenure plus there's also like fame. So if you've written a book, you could be kind of hired in recently, but if you wrote a book, then there'll be this kind of aura around about you. And I know quite a few people who've written books. So I know like so Keith Morris, who wrote the Infrastructure as Code book, and James Lewis, who didn't write the book on microservices but should have, because then he would have been famous instead of Sam Newman. And other people, like and Martin Fowler, occasionally you bump into Martin Fowler, but not anymore, because we're all remote. But and those people, I don't know about some other people, they spend half the time trying to break down the aura because they want people to come to them. They want to learn. They want to, they did something interesting once, but maybe now they're not, and they're like, other people will do these things. And again, people with tenure, lots of the people I respect with tenure spend a lot of their time and effort trying to break down this kind of this perceived distance or superiority that they think people probably do have of them because they've been around a long time and they know lots of people, etc., etc. So there's an active piece of, not piece of work, but people are consciously trying to break this stuff down, but it still comes in. People still expect it, right? They still, oh, crikey, that's Keith wrote the book, so I better, not say anything stupid in front of Keith. Keith will then say, I wish people would just ask me questions, right? I want to be challenged on all this kind of stuff, etc., etc. So it is there, and this is the thing, because it always is, and maybe it's situational, maybe it's contextual, maybe it's time-based, wherever you are. But it's still there. People still, I think that is part of just how human beings are, right? So I definitely fell into it when I came there, even though I joined ThoughtWorks because I wanted less constraints. And then I kind of, you look around. So one thing that because we're growing a lot, we've always grown, but now we're going through a phase shift at just amount of the size that we are. And there's lots of work to kind of go, do we need to, in the old days, you'd meet someone and they would signpost things and they would tell you things. And there's other roles which are like, kind of keeper of the law and all of this kind of stuff. But now there's a lot of new people, right? So as you grow, the number of new people compared to the people who've been there over 5 years is the balance is shifting. So how we maintain that, how we stay, we're not the same ThoughtWorks, but how we be a new ThoughtWorks and keep all of our kind of, purpose and principles and all those kind of things. That's an unanswered question, but that's one of the things that we keep looking at because it's super interesting, and that's kind of one of the things I get involved in. But how you keep that or transform that or find your new path, let people grow, let people come and go and join and all that kind of stuff. It's it's very interesting.
So there's an interesting chat going on here.
I know. I saw that.
So she says, I think purpose doesn't exist in the system except as a subsystem. The system has a purpose only within the larger system. People are within many systems overlapping purposes. Who has thoughts?
A system, they're all layered. So yeah.
Yeah, because this is one of the things that blew my mind about the Donella Meadows book is like the systems don't have boundaries. You just kind of artificially impose a boundary on a system, right? And it could be bigger or smaller and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's again, it's just a model that we put in to sort of make sense. I often go back to the Carl Sagan quote: if you want to make apple pie or some pie, you have to create from scratch. You have to create the universe first.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna love that.
Yeah.
Mark, you want to say something?
Yeah, so boundaries are a point of view. So I often actually use, to explain this, so I've studied actual biology. So that's where maybe some of the complexity thinking started. One thing that baffled me when I studied was, so I learned two things. So on one side, you learn how the human body works from an anatomical level, and you see all the organs. And then they actually explain you the biochemistry, and you see, so you can go, Hofrosch published this as a pathways of biochemical reactions in the body. And you suddenly see, so what actually happens metabolistic in your body? And so the professor then asked me, or asked the students provocatively, if they say, point out where the liver is, or where the heart is, or where the lung is. And it isn't, as in the biochemical map, so to speak, goes across these things and doesn't respect boundaries. It's only at the higher level suddenly, so you need to zoom out, so to speak, from the biochemical level to the real biological level to suddenly see cells and organs and etc. And so what Jessica alluded to is also something that Alicia Guerrero, which all those complexity people follow and read, articulates as meaning exists in the interaction of things, not the things themselves. And the same can be said for purpose or value or anything. So it's only the interactions, and so that actually make things happen. So an extremist view is process philosophy. So that's almost the other side of, so we have a tendency to be really focused on objects and the object nature or the objectiveness of things. The opposite view is process philosophy, where they basically say, oh yeah, objects are almost like just condensates happening out of all the processes, and you should actually ignore or not pay that much attention, pay more just to the interactions. I think some healthier way is find a balance of this. So if you look at practice theory, so people who follow what I'm doing will know that I'm hooked on it. One of the things, you are articulating the material as a materialization of competence. So tools, sorry, you look at tools as a materialization of competence. So if you think about technological tools, they often emerge because some people get really competent and they realize, oh, we can automate or we can capture some of these things and make it easier. And then resilience disappears from a system when nobody knows anymore how these tools really work. So they have lost the underlying competences. So J. Paul Reed, who's now some SRE guru on Netflix, he said that in a talk that he literally could connect companies having a problem with their technology because there's nobody there anymore that understands why these things are built this way. So why do you have a tool that does this? And so the practice that led to the tool has to still be honed. The advantage of having tools is that you need fewer of the people who are good at these practices, but the error that organizations often make is they kick them all out and then things break. And so a way to actually surface problems when you have tools is, if you have complex systems and they don't behave the way you want, is remove some of the tooling so that your human experience has a bigger surface to the problem, and you start suddenly to see maybe some of the interactions that are going wrong that the tool has abstracted away from you. So interactions and things need to be in balance.
There's knowing, so there's people I know at Netflix, and what's two interesting things exactly to Mark's points. Number one, they're not as technologically advanced as everyone gives them credit for doing. You know, they're using Spring, right? And they'll talk about it quite freely, but everyone forgets they're doing it. They didn't use, Docker or Kubernetes. They were hand rolling and baking their own VMs and all this stuff because they like to stay closer to the metal. And the other thing is, from a technology perspective, but also from a bureaucracy perspective, they experiment with removing things to see if stuff still, if they need it. They put it in place because they needed it, but then, do we still need it? Maybe if we take it away. And it's very interesting that they kind of, they do that kind of stuff just to make sure that they didn't put it, because things like you say, Mark, you put things in place and then you forget why it's there, and then the guard changes and a new set of people come in, and the reason it's there is because that's just what we do, and everyone forgets that that's what we do. And I mean, you see it we were talking about this at DDD Europe.
It's a cultural attack also to the "it's not invented here" syndrome.
Yeah,
exactly.
If this is a cultural thing, just constantly cut away the things that you've made. You will never have this, we're going to remake it because it's not made by us. I think that's a very interesting cultural aspect as well.
Yeah, Yeah. Because I once asked them, I was like, do you not have technical debt? Because everywhere I go has technical debt. And they're like, no, we build in obsolescence. We rewrite most of our stuff. So one of the big reasons they did microservices is because they were smaller. So it was easier to rewrite it. That's one of their definitions of what a microservice is. It's just because they can throw it out and rewrite it quite rapidly. So they don't get attached to it. It doesn't accumulate all of this debt, etc.
Yeah, I heard Dan North use that definition for microservice replaceability.
Yeah. But then nobody does it, right? Because we cherish them.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's my perfect code.
So we've been at it for 1.5 hours. So I think we can go up to a closure. But I like the way, and to frame it back to a bit about domain-driven design, right? Which is essentially the main pattern is bounded context. They are discovered in interactions. They are not there, but you need to discover and decide upon that.
And just a little on context map, because it took me so many years to understand that those patterns, the context patterns, they are not about technical integration.
They're all about human beings.
They're mostly interaction and team. Yeah, exactly.
Back to that again.
So my final question. So most of our audiences are either usually software architects or developers. So to close off, I have one final question. What could you do tomorrow? So is there one heuristic you can think of about what people can do tomorrow to start fostering this towards agency, to start thinking, what is one tip, easy advice that people can take away tomorrow? Because we've talked about a lot of theories and a lot of complex stuff, but what's something people can take away tomorrow? Maybe really simple. So for me, I always say, if you make a decision, for instance, if you make a decision in your team, ask the rest of the team, what do you need to come along with this decision? Right? That's always my negotiation. So not just saying this decision, but also ask other people, what does it require for you to go along? So that would be my quick tip here. So to any one of you, what would be your advice tomorrow to the technical leader or the developer in a team? That's usually
actually, if I can go first, I would actually recommend, I use, at least that's my approach a lot, is democracy in your team. Mainly because probably a little bit of the way I approach things, because when I come in as a consultant, I know least of everybody there. So I can't come in and just say, do this and do that, because I don't know how things work here. So it's kind of my way to get people on board, say, okay, I'm here, I'm helping you, but how can I help you? How can I do for you better? So when we're going to design something, how would you design it? How would you do it? Okay, we have one solution. Could we come up with 3 more, for example, and stuff like that? That's what I will do. Christina?
Should I? What I'm doing all the time is really the same democracy, just showing tools, showing methods, discussing problems. So showing the problems, look, this is what we have to do now, and either waiting or anyway, discussing with the team which way to go. And I asked them to, if I have a decision because I had more time to think about it, please challenge it. Please say if I'm wrong. Please ask the dummies, not the dummies, all the questions, and they are asking all the questions from junior until the most senior, and this is great. And in the team where nobody asks questions, I'm lost because I have surely half of the decisions are wrong or a part of it. How should I know if nobody's challenged it? So my culture is, and more my empowerment method is really challenge it. Please ask questions. Please prove me wrong, or no, challenge it.
Challenge.
Yeah.
Who's next?
So usually I recommend 2 things. So the first thing is, if you're somebody with authority, try to make feedback loops actually work. So we have now lots of organizations that do Agile, but the feedback loops do not work. So how do you know that it works is if the feedback loop actually is used to change the system. So as I said, you're putting constraints into place, then go and gather feedback and allow that feedback directly to influence the constraint that you put in place. So that's the only way to make it work. And the other thing so if you're more bottom up, as in you need to have guerrilla tactics or something, how you want to change things if you're not an authority. The system you're in has evolved. Yeah, nobody has designed it that way, and so hence no design will change it. You need to figure out who it works for and why it works for them. And once you understand that, then you can either try to play against them or with them or something. But if you want to change the system, you need to understand who it works for and why.
Good, thanks. Andrew, Ellis, any final words?
Ellis, I'm trying to not jump in. Ellis,
I would say define the expected behavior, and that is in the team and also of your manager. So when you talk about autonomy, define how does autonomy look like. If we're talking about responsibility, if we talk about collaboration, how does that look like? Pay attention and spend time on defining that.
As you say, make the implicit explicit.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, no, we're nice.
I love that with DDD.
Yeah, that's what we usually. That's what we usually do.
That's given me enough time to think of my one. I think, and I would say this because it's, no, exactly the last word. Which I didn't plan. So we say this at Thoughts a lot, but I think it's actually true, and it's get comfortable feeling uncomfortable, because lots of the things that we're talking about won't feel like how things work. So you're going to have to change things. And one of the biggest things about changing things is getting used to the fact that you probably don't know all the answers anymore, and it's going to feel a bit weird, and you might have given someone the responsibility for something which you might feel safer having yourself. That get used to it feeling weird, because if you don't and then you take that back and stop changing, then it won't change.
I agree. Getting comfortable feeling of being wrong. I don't know who posted that. There was a TED talk by somebody who said that when you feel bad about being wrong, it's not that it's you being wrong that's the problem. It's they found out you were wrong.
Yeah,
that's
it's all about shame.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but this challenging technique, it solves all these problems, because it is normal. You expect this. You want
You're wrong
to
all
be
the time.
challenged. It's
that's the status quo. We're always wrong.
We're always wrong. Yeah.
And with that final words, if you just know you're wrong, it doesn't matter anymore, right? So accept that you're wrong.
Yeah, accept that you're wrong, and then you can be open and discuss openly.
Yeah. So I'm wrong now with closing this session.
But you accept it, Kenny.
But I accept it, yeah. So thanks everyone. I'm gonna close the stream, so I'm not closing the Zoom yet. We can talk a little bit afterwards, see how long people want to stay, but I'm gonna officially close the session. Thank you to the panelists, right, for being here and give your thoughts, your wisdom, and anything. Thanks to every attendee who pitched in. And we're going to put this up at the podcast tomorrow, and hopefully see you at the next meetup, which is in around 2 weeks. And we have Ellis de Haan doing Ask Me Anything, a fire chat. So we're looking forward to all the.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
And I am
looking forward to all these questions that are being fired to him, and he's going to answer them. And as always, if you have any comments, feedback, or anything you want to hear, let us know and give us feedback. The quicker the feedback, the better. We just learned, hopefully. So thanks, and see you next time.